Hi bag makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. Let's talk boxed corners. In this video I'll show you exactly how to pin or clip them to prepare and how I stitch them together for a clean and professional finish each and every time. Whether you're new to bag making or just want to refine your technique, this step-by-step guide will help you get those corners sitting just right. If you've got a favourite tip or trick for boxing corners, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. We can all learn from each other. Let's go! So first what we're going to do is just open your tote bag out by pulling your outer panels away from each other, encouraging the side seams to come in towards each other. And if you work your fingers down the center of each outer panel, you'll find that the bottom will come out and sit nice and flat, and that is what we want. We want this bottom seam to be out and nice and flat so that when we look at each corner it starts to squeeze together, and that's where we're going to stitch it to create that box. So once you have your tote bag sitting nice and flat on your mat and your outer panels are pulled apart from each other, we're just going to work on one side at a time. And what I like to do first is just put my finger in and just ensure that the fabric is sitting nice and flat in that fold and that it's not bunched out in the fold and not creased. So you just make sure it's nice and flat and then just pinch that and sort of finger press it to help keep it where you want it. And I'm just going to put a temporary clip there. Repeat that on the other side. So again, you can feel with your finger to make sure the fabric is sitting nice and flat. Give it a bit of a squeeze and just clip it to hold it together. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to match up the side seam and the bottom seam together. And I like to push the seam allowances to one side. So as I'm sewing down here, I want to ensure that the bottom seam is in the same direction as I'm going, so I don't have to fuss with trying to flatten that out, and that the top seam is towards my foot so I can easily flatten that as I need to. Just makes it a little bit easier when I'm at the machine. So lining up your two seam allowances, or the seams, sorry, that you've stitched, pushing a seam allowance in each direction. So I like to push the bottom one to the right, the top one to the left, and pin or clip that to hold it in place. Once that's in place, we can then make sure that the rest of the edge is nice and flat and just readjust those clips we put in at the start. And once you're happy with that, your first corner is clipped in place. So turn your bag over. We're just going to repeat that process for the other side. So again, flattening out your corners and making sure that fabric is nice and flat. It's not bunched in the corners. And then this time what we want to do is make sure that our seam is going to be running in the same direction as the other side. So as you can see, the seam on top, the seam allowance on top here on this side is pointing to the right. So this one I'm also going to have pointing to the right, which means the one underneath is going to be pointing to the left. Just helps keep things nice and tidy. So matching up those seams, putting my seam allowances in the correct directions, and clip in place. Then we can just tidy up the rest of that, those raw edges, and that one is nice and clipped in place. So once your two box corners are clipped or pinned together, pause the video, get ready at your machine, and I'll show you how to stitch these to get a really nice and secure finish on those box corners. So at your machine, I like to use my walking foot because I find that helps feed the thickness through really easily. Make sure you have your needle set to the needle down position, and you have a normal stitch length set of about 2 to 2.5 millimeters. Also, because this seam, it's thicker, and once you turn the bag through, sometimes the stitching can be slightly visible, ever so slightly. So I find I always like to use a thread that is going to match the fabric on the outside of the bag, just to help make those stitches more invisible and less noticeable if for some reason there is a lot of tension pulling on that seam. So we're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch allowance. I'm just going to position the first part of my corner under my foot at my 1/2 inch mark, and I like to start maybe 1/2 inch in from the slanted edge and then reverse back to that edge. So I'm just going to make a couple of stitches forwards. I'm just going to lock and reverse and go back. Take that off, and now all we're going to do simply is just stitch nice and slowly and steadily using a 1/2 inch allowance all the way across this first corner. Okay, as you come up to the clip on those seams, just keep your fingers on them to help encourage them to stay flat, to stay together and stay pretty much where we've put them. If you get any bunching, you can lift your foot to help the foam or fleece flatten out, and you can also pull a little bit of tension away from your needle just to help ensure that everything is sitting flat and where it should be. So nice and slowly over that bulk in the middle, and once you know you're past the seam allowance on the bottom, I actually like to reverse and stitch back over it just to provide a little bit of extra reinforcement there, and then forward again. Remove that last clip, and we're going to stitch right down to the slanted side, again retaining that 1/2 inch allowance as best you can. And when we get there, we're going to reinforce and finish off. And that's the first side sewn. So what I like to do on box corners and tote bags, because they're a bigger bag, is I actually then will flip my bag over and I will stitch that seam again from the other side, making sure it is still a 1/2 inch seam allowance and reinforcing over the center just to give it that extra bit of strength, so I know the seam is really durable, really locked in place, and technically it shouldn't break when I'm using the bag out and about. And that one's sewn. So from here, pause the video, flip your bag back over and readjust it, ready to stitch the second boxed corner. And once you've stitched that one twice, pop back to your workstation and we will continue. So once you've stitched both boxed corners and you've stitched them twice, one from each side, we're just going to tidy them up a bit. So just going to trim off any excess threads and also trim the seam down to 1/4 inch. Again, I just like to use my ruler, but you can use scissors if you prefer. And that's nice and tidy. So once trimmed, what we can do is we can turn our bag right side out and we can have a look at what our tote is going to look like when it's all finished. So turning those outer panels out, reach in and push those corners out, and you can have a look at the seam, the join of the seams in the center, and really use your finger to push and squeeze those corners out nice and sharp. And on the other side, that seam through the center looks really good. Squeeze out those points. And that is the box of the boxed corner bag, looking really nice there. I'm really happy with that. Corners. So pulling your lining panels apart so they are essentially folded in half, and work your way down, keeping them apart so that your base is nice and flat and essentially sitting flat on your work surface. From there we can pair up our corners, pushing the seam allowances to opposite directions just to help everything sit nice and flat, matching up those seams and pin or clip, and again working on the outer sides as well. And there's one, and work and find the other one. Make sure that seam allowance is facing the same way all the way across the bottom of the lining. So once you have your two box corners clipped or pinned in place, pause the video and head over to your machine and stitch to close using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like we did for the outer tote, except this time you only need to stitch across it once, not twice, because it is the lining, it's not going to be taking the weight of the bag as much as the outer. So once you've stitched both box corners, pop back here and we will continue. Once you've stitched your 2 box corners on your lining, it's time to just trim those down to 1/4 inch, just like we did for the outer bag. There we go, so they're nice and tidy. And that's how I prepare and sew boxed corners to get that crisp, structured look that really makes a handbag look and feel polished. Let me know in the comments if this video has helped or if there's a step that you do differently. I'm always keen to hear what works for other makers. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more sewing tips, tutorials and real-time walkthroughs. Until next time, happy sewing!